His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Honorable Minister of External Affairs of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and warm welcome to you for the special press interaction that we have today on the occasion of the visit of His Excellency Sergey Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, to our country. We will begin with statements to the media from both ministers. May I now request Honorable External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar, to make opening remarks. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Arnab. I'm delighted to address you all at the conclusion of my talks today with my Russian counterpart, Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov. Of course, none of you would be surprised to learn that the discussions were very warm, they were comprehensive, they were very productive. Now, time-tested is a frequently used and clearly justified description of India-US relations. Though the world has changed in the last 7 decades and there have been different governments at both ends, our ties, I'm sure Minister Lavrov would agree, have remained uniquely strong and steady. And the reason for that has been our consistent ability to identify and update our shared interests. We are both cognizant of the multipolar and rebalanced nature of international relations today. We both understand the importance of our relationship to global peace, security, and stability. And therefore, as foreign ministers, we work hard to deliver on that responsibility. Much of our discussions today covered the preparations for President Putin's visit for the annual summit later this year. I'm sure Mr. Lavrov would share my assessment that our bilateral cooperation remains energetic and forward-looking. We talked about long-standing partnership in nuclear, space, and defense sectors. We assessed positively our economic cooperation, noting the new opportunities in Russian Far East. We spoke of connectivity, including the International North-South Transport Corridor and the Chennai-Vladivostok Eastern Maritime Corridor. Our rapidly expanding energy cooperation that now includes long-term commitments was also on the agenda. On my part, I briefed Minister Lavrov on recent developments in India that open up new opportunities for Russian businesses in various sectors. The Atmanirbhar Bharat economic vision can facilitate a more contemporary economic relationship in the post-COVID era. This review of our bilateral cooperation was really encouraging. We note the appetite for greater investments in each other by both countries. Russian support for our Gaganyaan program has progressed, which we deeply appreciate. Our defense sector requirements in the past year were expeditiously addressed. And in meeting the COVID challenge, our pharmaceutical collaboration has become more serious. And as many of you are aware, we have a Russian vaccine under discussion for production in India. There was naturally an exchange of views and assessments on important regional and global matters. This had particular importance because we are both members of the UN Security Council right now. We are a non-permanent member. Russia is a permanent member. Issues on which India is chairing UNSC committees came up in some detail. India has also taken over the chair of BRICS and RIC from Russia for this year. And our common membership of the G20, ASEAN-led forums, SCO, and the SICA added to the substance of our conversation. One question on which we spent some time is the unfolding developments in and around Afghanistan. As you all know, the Heart of Asia Istanbul Process Conference took place last week. I was in Dushanbe for that. There have been other discussions of a bilateral or plurilateral nature as well. Many more can be expected in the coming days. For India, what happens in Afghanistan impacts its security directly. I shared our approach that a durable peace there would require harmonizing interests of all, both within and around that country. The peace process must be based on foundational principles to which we all subscribe, and a political solution should mean an independent, sovereign, united, and democratic Afghanistan. There was an exchange of views on West Asia, the Gulf, and Iran. This is a geography where we both have long-standing equities, and our active diplomacy reflects that to great measure. Peace and stability in such a sensitive and vital region is in global interest. I shared our viewpoint on the Indo-Pacific. As our Prime Minister pointed out at the Shangri-La dialogue some years ago, contemporary challenges require countries to work together in new and different ways. Such cooperation also reflects the multipolar and rebalanced character of global politics. India is strongly committed to ASEAN centrality, and this is underlined by the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative that it has been advocating at the East Asia Summit. As we implement our Act East and Beyond policy, Russia is a very important partner, whether it is their Far East or whether it is the Chennai-Vladivostok corridor. In addition, of course, there was the larger backdrop of global political changes that provided a context for our talks today. As long-standing partners, we could discuss their implications with a high degree of confidence and comfort. I valued the quality of our discussions today very much. We have completed a decade of our special and privileged strategic partnership, and that certainly permeated the tenor of our discussions. We also reviewed the forthcoming high-level exchanges leading up to the annual summit this year. Once again, Minister Lavrov, it's a great pleasure to welcome you back to New Delhi, and I would request you to make your statement.
Спасибо. Уважаемые дамы и господа.
Ladies and gentlemen, I share same assessment that my friend mentioned, Mr. EAM Jaishankar. Our talks have been very constructive, confident, and useful, as it goes in our relations between Russia and India. These ties are valuable, mutually respectful, and they are not subjected to political fluctuations. We noted with satisfaction that despite the pandemic, we were able to preserve the dynamic bilateral political dialogue. We both agree that this attests to the maturity and remarkable resilience of our relations that can be characterized in our document signed at the highest level as particular privileged strategic partnership. We focused on the content of the planned bilateral contacts, including at the highest level. I mean here the visit of the President of the Russian Federation to India. I conveyed on my colleague the message from Putin to Mr. Modi, including on these issues. We agreed to joint efforts to overcome the declining mutual trade caused by the pandemic. We are going to build up investment according to the national programs in our respective countries. We also discussed energy, including nuclear one, peaceful exploration of the space, transportation infrastructure projects, including in the Russian Far East and in the Arctic. To this end, we are going to organize meeting of co-chairs as well as the scheduled meeting of the Intergovernmental Russian-Indian Commission on Trade and Economic, Scientific and Technological, as well as cultural cooperation. We agreed that we need to galvanize work on the renewed intergovernmental agreement on mutual security of investment, as well as increasing the share of national currency in respectful settlements. Working on the trade and economic interaction with New Delhi is one of the priorities of the Eurasian Economic Union. In accordance with the agreements previously achieved, we hope to launch as soon as possible talks on the free trade area between India and Eurasian Economic Union based on mutual benefit. We discussed bilateral military cooperation, including state-of-the-art weapons manufacturing. In this strategically important area, Russia is a major foreign contractor for New Delhi. We are the only partner that indeed transfers to India cutting-edge military technologies. I'm sure that the deepening of the Russian-Indian military cooperation serves national interests of both countries. At the same time, we respect the right of our Indian friends to diversify its ties in this area. We are also positive about cooperation in the area, as I already mentioned, the peaceful exploration of the space on such avenues as manned programs, rocket engine building, and satellite navigation. The exchange of views on thorny issues of today shows proximity or similarity of our stances. We discuss such issues as peaceful settlement in Afghanistan, Syrian crisis, situation around Iran's nuclear program, situation in Myanmar. We also discussed the situation in the Eurasian continent and in Asia-Pacific in general, including our ties with ASEAN. Both parties highlighted the importance of preserving the central role of ASEAN in various formats established in this region. We hold in high regard Russian-Indian relationships on the international arena, including in the UN, SCO, G20, BRICS, where New Delhi is a chairperson. We highlighted the demand of interaction in the format Russia, India, China, as well as the summits of Eastern Asia. We are grateful to our Indian partners for their responsible approach in international affairs, and we are grateful for the facilitation in issues that are important to us. We are satisfied by the outcomes of the talks, and we wish you every success in your role as the UNSC non-permanent member, and I hope that we'll be able to deepen our multifaceted cooperation. I invited my friend and colleague, Russia, and I hope that this would take place in foreseeable future. Thank you.
Excellency. I will now invite questions for the dignitaries. Unfortunately, I know there's a lot of interest, but given the time constraints, we will be limiting to 2 questions from the Indian media and 2 from the Russian media. From the first question, perhaps Rezaul Hassan Laskar from the HT.
My question is for the Russian Foreign Minister. Good afternoon, Rezaul Hassan from the Hindustan Times. In recent years, there's been growing, Minister here, sorry. In recent years and in recent times, there's been growing political trust and military cooperation between China and Russia. And this has led to some speculation in some quarters about a possibility of a China-Russia military alliance. Does the Foreign Minister think that the 2 countries are heading in that direction?
Нет, и об этом
No,
не только говорим, но это зафиксировано
we
в двусторонних
have fixed that in our bilateral relations adopted at the highest level in the course of the Russia-China summits, where we said that our relations are at their highest in the history. But these relations do not pursue a goal of establishing a military alliance. By the way, we've heard speculations about pro-military alliances, not only regarding Russia-China relations. We also heard about such alliances allegedly being promoted such as Middle East NATO, and we also heard about Asian NATO. Today we exchanged views on this, and our Indian friends have the same position as we. We believe that this is counterproductive. We are interested in inclusive cooperation that is for something, not against somebody.
Next question to Russian journalist, Igor Zhdanov from Russia Today. There you are. Thank you.
Yes, Igor Zhdanov, RT. My question is to both ministers. It's on vaccine cooperation. There's a good chance that Russia's Sputnik V vaccine might be approved for emergency use in India. So have you discussed maybe doing something similar about the Indian vaccine, Covaxin, in Russia? And on the back of this, maybe a quick comment, if I may, from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov on current affairs. I will switch to Russian on that. Sergey Viktorovich, как бы вы прокомментировали последнее заявление украинских чиновников?
How would you comment on the latest statements of highly placed Ukrainian officials and military personnel regarding Russia as the main aggressor in the Donbas conflict? How big is the risk of the Donbas conflict turning into an active phase?
As for the vaccine, you are right in stating that we have tight cooperation with our Indian friends on this issue. The Russian Fund of Direct Investment signed contracts with several Indian contractors to manufacture Sputnik V vaccine, about 750 million doses. And this becomes possible because of the manufacturing capacity in India. I do not exclude that further cooperation also would cover the manufacturing of the vaccine, of the Indian vaccine in Russia. I guess that the experts are supposed to discuss this and to assess the efficiency of such a cooperation. As for the statement of the Ukrainian government, there have been a lot of analytical articles. We are concerned by this. We told these our European colleagues as well. We are hopeful that there is an understanding of what's happening in Washington, but unfortunately, the response and actions of our Western colleagues on the building up of the military infrastructure as well as the transfer of the troops to the contact line in Donbas is disappointing. Western colleagues still believe that they need to, in all ways possible, support the Ukrainian authorities, including its unacceptable statements and actions. Remember when President Zelensky repeatedly, as well as those responsible for the Normandy contact group on Donbas, repeatedly stated that Minsk agreements are needed only to preserve sanctions of the West against Russia, or they ask for a complete revision of the Minsk agreements, or they also suggest breaching the agreed formats. They invite pro-Ukrainian representatives into the Normandy format and the contact group. All of this is lamentable, and there is no response to these statements. There has been none from our Western colleagues, although we see a flagrant violation of all the Minsk agreements by the Kiev. And now Kiev turned from political violations to the threat of military action. Perhaps this would help to shake this friendly approach towards Ukraine from the European capitals, and they would demand that Mr. Zelensky fulfills Minsk agreements fully, for them to start through the dialogue with Donetsk and Lugansk in actions. The Minsk agreements, because he is supposed to overcome threats in the area of security, stop the shelling of the civil infrastructure that leads to the death toll among the civilians, not for the first time. And of course, they need to determine in this direct dialogue the issue of the final status of the areas that I'm talking about. They need to settle the date for the elections. All of this is well known. Unfortunately, every time the Normandy format meetings take place, be that at the level of leaders or the level of representatives of foreign ministry staff, we see no proactive steps from our French and German colleagues to influence our Ukrainian colleagues. Now it's too obvious that this needs to be done immediately.
On the vaccines issue, which was also addressed to me, We had a discussion, and clearly, that decision has to be taken by our regulatory authorities. For us, were those vaccines to be made in India, it would be one more affirmation of the importance of made in India and our own vaccine capacities. But on your other question of Covaxin, I think if my memory serves me right, so far we have sent Covaxin perhaps to 3 or 4 countries abroad. And we would certainly like to promote both made in India and invented in India. So it is something I'm sure in due course we would address. On that note, I should also share with you that in our discussions on the economic and business opportunities between India and Russia, I drew to Minister Lavrov's attention the fact that we have a very ambitious program called Production-Linked Incentives to expand manufacturing in India in 13 designated sectors. We believe that this would be a good opportunity for Russian businesses to look at partnerships in India, because one thing is very clear, that in the post-COVID world, all of us are going to be very sensitive about our supply chains. All of us would like to be much more secure about, whether it is food, whether it is health, or whether it is actually the requirements of our daily economy. So in all of this, I do see an opportunity, a new opportunity today for India-Russia economic collaboration.
Thank you. The next question from the Indian side, Pranay Upadhyay from ABP News.
My question is to Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. Sir, this side. So since Moscow is taking a lead in the peace process of Afghanistan, what is your view about any future power sharing agreement where Taliban gets a greater role? Do you think that this would stabilize the situation in Afghanistan, and more so, being a major power in the region, is Russia inclined towards taking a role of responsibility in being a net security provider in the situation? Also, since Russia is actively involved in this region, and since you had a discussion with the Indian Foreign Minister, what are the areas of cooperation you have identified, both of you have identified, as far as India-Russia cooperation in Afghanistan is concerned?
As for the Taliban movement is part of the Afghan society, and decisions on the settlements in Afghanistan should foresee the participation of all political as well as ethnic and religious groups of Afghanistan. Otherwise, it's not going to be stable. This decision has to be based on the balance of political and ethnic and religious interests, including the representation in the borders of power. Any other way that foresees the exclusion of any group from this process will not lead to the agreements that could be implementable and sustainable. All of these would be fraught with the risk of the resumption of the hostilities, which is not anybody's desire, the members of the process. I'll remind that the previous administration agreed with the Taliban movement, and hopefully they would be implemented. They created a window of opportunities to reach agreement between all the hostile parties. It would be sad if it breaks. As for the security, providing security in Afghanistan, it depends primarily on whether the settlement will be achieved in a fast and efficient way. It's supposed to take into account the issue of the political settlement as well as security and safety. The Afghan security forces, the army, we train them, we send them military purpose production sometimes free, sometimes on easy conditions. And when Afghanistan reconciles, when the settlement of all political issues happens, the international community will be able to be more active in assisting with the strengthening of the Afghanistanis security forces. We should also take into account the regional context. We would welcome, along with the domestic settlement of Afghanistan, we would welcome the consultations and talks on how to reinforce such agreements with the confidence-building measures, strengthening of security, with the involvement of the neighbors of Afghanistan. We have similar positions with India. We always say that neighbors and all powerful actors in the region should set up conditions for the Afghanistani population to agree domestically. And as for the involvement of external actors, the best way here is to advocate the Moscow format. We brought together several times the participants of the format. These are not only neighbors of Afghanistan, but all Central Asia countries, India, Pakistan, China, Iran, the USA, and the Russian Federation. We stand ready to hold respective consultations and meetings if need be, if it is found appropriate by all of the countries that I've just enumerated. I hope that this would give an impetus to the Afghani talks that started in the capital of Qatar, Doha, but it was faced by grave problems and was suspended. I'll remind that there is a number of factors we need to sort out to understand how to further settle the conflict in terms of our external contribution in setting up all the necessary conditions. We agreed with Mr. Jaishankar that our representatives on Afghanistan will keep tight contacts regularly.
Next question to the Russian Federation. Leila Turyanova from TASS.
Лейл Троянова, ТАСС. Сергей Викторович, первый вопрос вам. Ранее вы отмечали, что
to you, Mr. Lavrov. You mentioned earlier that US is applying pressure on India against military technical cooperation with Russia. Did this make the implementation of the existing agreements and the process of negotiations on new contracts more difficult?
Is India considering the possibility of acquiring additional S-400 regiments from Russia, despite the threat of U.S. sanctions? Спасибо.
Right. In fact, it wasn't me who stated that the U.S. exercises pressure on India, but any other country that wants to sign agreements with Russia on the delivery of weapons, or that has such contracts, the USA says this overtly. We all well know this. But we also know the reciprocal reaction, the response of India. We did not discuss these statements from the USA. Instead, we confirmed that we are going to deepen our military cooperation. We have Intergovernmental Committee on the Military Technical Cooperation that has its own plans. We also discussed the prospect of an additional manufacturing of the Russian military equipment in India within the concept Made in India, and within the concept of the independent India. So here, I didn't feel any fluctuations or changes from our Indian partners and friends.
I think the Minister has answered your question, which was we didn't get into any specific discussions. That is a responsibility of a different body, which is headed by our defense ministers, which is due to meet at the end of the year.
Thank you, Honourable Ministers. This concludes the press interaction session. I thank you all for being here in person. Bye.
Joint press briefing by External Affairs Minister of India and Russia. Sergey Lavrov is in India and he's held talks with Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar on a host of issues. Obviously, one of the main focus areas was the India-Russia partnership that goes back decades and has stood the test of time. The two countries also discussed on economic cooperation and business opportunities. Mr. Jaishankar drew Lavrov's attention that we have a very ambitious program called Production-Linked Incentive to expand manufacturing in India in 13 designated sectors. Talks were also held on a host of global issues, including the coup in Myanmar, including the Afghanistan crisis, on which both Mr. Lavrov and Mr. Jaishankar stressed that India and Russia have a shared vision, a joint vision for the crisis in Afghanistan as well. Russian FM also said that we have similar position with India. He added that India and Russia's views on Afghanistan were aligned and the best way forward is the Moscow format. They added that Taliban is part of Afghan society and any possible settlement in Afghanistan should involve all parties in Afghanistan. Also discussed was the vaccination drive. Now remember, there have been talks that Russia's Sputnik vaccine may get approval in India, and Mr. Jaishankar stressed that we have exported Covaxin, the Indian-made vaccine, as well to 3 or 4 other countries abroad, and we will certainly like to promote both Made in India and Invest in India programs in partnership with Russia. So the talks involved a host of issues, a crucial India-Russia dialogue. Joining us for more details on this is WION's principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal. Siddhant, over to you.
Were discussed during the meeting, whether it's the visit of the Russian president, Myanmar, other issues as well. But largely it was the question-answer session, which was pretty interesting because several questions were raised on Afghanistan, the role Russians see for India when it comes to Afghanistan. The Russian foreign minister talked about that both countries shared the similar view about Afghanistan. But the Russian foreign minister pointed out that they believe that the Moscow format is something that they would favor for. We know that the Americans had requested and have proposed a UN-led initiative with foreign ministers of the regional countries, including India. And previously, we know that when it comes to Moscow format, the Russians have invited India as well. So Afghanistan clearly becoming the focal point of this entire meeting. The meeting lasted for many hours. It was scheduled for 1 hour initially, but it exceeded that time limit. But also, interestingly, there were questions on whether there is a military alliance being planned between Russia and China, to which the Russian foreign minister clearly said no, that was expected. But what he said after was interesting. He pointed out that there are speculations of Asian NATO, which of course we all know is the Quad, something that we have seen gaining currency here in New Delhi. So the press conference talking about the entire issue about what the Russians believe. So, but also the Indian External Affairs Minister talked about their vision of Indo-Pacific. This is interesting also because we know that the Russians are not very keen on Indo-Pacific vision. They see it as an exclusionary concept, while the Indians have many times explained, in fact, during this meeting also, it looks like that the Indians explained that this is not an exclusionary concept. This is the reality, the geopolitical reality of the current century. So a pretty interesting meeting, the meeting which, of course, saw that both sides frankly exchanging their views on multiple subjects, including the visit of the Russian president as well. We know the Russian President Vladimir Putin is expected to visit India later this year for the India-Russia annual bilateral summit level meeting. This could happen towards the end of the year, but largely now the Russian foreign minister goes to Islamabad, where of course we know that he is expected to be welcomed by the Pakistani foreign minister at the airport.
Absolutely, Siddhant. You know, that was a huge announcement coming in from Mr. Lavrov saying that there is no military alliance between Russia and China. But let's focus on the ties between India and Russia at the moment. Mr. Lavrov and Mr. Jaishankar also spoke about trade and business. But another important announcement by the Russian FM, he says that we will deepen Russia's military cooperation with India. And Russia has been one of India's biggest defense partners going back decades, isn't it?
Yes, defense, Shobit, forms the key pillar of relationship between Moscow and New Delhi. And during this meeting, in fact, the last question during the press conference was on S-400, whether the American pressures is going to go against New Delhi. Of course, India has this long-standing answer to this, which is that India has its own sovereign right to go for defense purchases with any country, and that is something that was in fact reiterated as well. But largely, we know that last year the Indian Defense Minister had visited Moscow 2 times. One, of course, for the SCO meeting, another for the Victory Day parade. And during that visit, the earlier visit, when he visited Moscow for the Victory Day parade, he had handed over the Russians a list of defense equipments so that they can be expeditiously sent to India. And for that, the External Affairs Minister, the Indian External Affairs Minister, also pointed out thanking the Russian side on that part as well. But nonetheless, what is interesting is that the Russian Foreign Minister talked about India's Atmanirbhar Bharat policy. Of course, did not mention Atmanirbhar. He said that India is working on self-sufficiency when it comes to defense equipments, and Russia can indeed play an important role. So largely defense is something that cannot be separated when it comes to India-Russia partnership, because that has been a key component. We know that both sides are also focusing on increasing people-to-people relationship, which of course is not doing well if you compare it with the India-US relationship.
Siddhant, this is a very this is a very risky tightrope that New Delhi has to walk, isn't it, as far as balancing ties with Russia and balancing ties with the Quad partnership. Now, like you mentioned, India and Russia defense partnership goes back decades, and Quad is a reality of today's world, isn't it? US, India, Japan and Australia have formed the Quad to counter China's growing aggressiveness in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, S-400 deal that India has signed with Russia is also in question because US has threatened sanctions against any country that buys Russian military hardware. India is very keen on the S-400 as well. So how does India negotiate this?
Well, it's a tightrope walk for India between Moscow and Washington. But what is interesting to note that both Moscow and Washington met today in New Delhi. We know that the U.S. climate envoy John Kerry is in Delhi and the Russian foreign minister is in Delhi, and both are staying in the same hotel. So there was this meeting as well. This was a chance meeting, what the U.S. embassy is saying. But nonetheless, in a global geopolitical order, there are no friends, there are no permanent enemies. And perhaps India is trying to engage with all of its friends, even though some of its friends do not have the same thought process, especially when it comes to Indo-Pacific, because interestingly, the Indian External Affairs Minister talked about Indo-Pacific while the Russian Foreign Minister talked about Asia-Pacific. This is a key divergence between Moscow and New Delhi, but both sides are making sure that this long-standing relationship that has stood the test of time, this is something which is a very a relationship which is celebrated a lot. We know that both have this annual summit level mechanism. India has this summit level mechanism only with 2 countries, with Russia and with Japan. So largely the focus is to make sure that when it comes to convergences, there are convergences with Moscow, with convergences with Washington as well. But of course, it's a difficult task at a time when the world order is completely changing very fast. And that is primarily because of the Chinese aggressiveness. And we know the Russians and Chinese are quite close to each other.
So then one final question. Obviously, the talks focused on bilateral relations between India and Russia, but during the press conference, we also heard questions on a host of global issues, including the Myanmar military coup, including the Russia-Ukraine crisis as well.
A whole host of issues were raised and discussed. In fact, Ukraine was something that was expected to be raised during the press conference, given the situation there. And he, of course, talked about how the Ukrainian side is not following the Minsk Pact. But Myanmar is also another key topic where both sides, the Russian side and the Indian side, have been engaging, especially at the United Nations Security Council. The Russian side has recently just said that if there are sanctions put on Myanmar, that can exacerbate the situation on the ground. The Indian side, of course, has been trying to have a constructive approach on Myanmar. India shares, of course, long border, both maritime and land border with Myanmar. So multiple things were discussed. And the fact that this is the first high-level visit from Moscow to New Delhi is an opportunity for both sides to engage physically at a time of COVID pandemic. We know that Russian Foreign Minister is in midst of his multi-country visit. It's just not India and Pakistan. He's visiting other countries as well. And This is primarily for two reasons. One, of course, Afghanistan, so that there can be convergences, and another on the issue of Ukraine, which was expected to be raised, and it did came up during the press conference.
Siddhant Sibal, thank you so much for joining us with the latest on this meeting between Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and Russia's Foreign Minister. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.